We've just hit 1,000 subscribers on this channel, and as a little mini celebration, I thought I'd go through and read some of your great bookish comments. Before we get into it, I kind of just wanted to say, I know 1,000 subscribers, it's not really a lot, and when I first started putting out content, putting out videos, I kind of had it in my mind that I wouldn't bother if there wasn't a huge amount of traction, and I don't know what I was defining as traction, but I said I didn't give myself a very long time, I gave myself a few months, and I thought, well, if nobody's particularly bothered about this kind of content, and I was really defeatist because I thought we're in a society now where we don't hold up scholarship, traditional classical scholarship. We don't want to talk about books with nuance. If we do talk about books, it's like mainstream and it's very, very glossed over. It's very, very superficial. We don't go into any depth. People don't have real conversations, essentially. So I was a bit defeatist before I even started, and I kind of thought, no one's really going to care about, talking about Anna Karenina or Les Misérables, let alone comparing translations and stuff like that. But people do. And again, 1,000 subs, it's not really a lot, but what we talk about in the marketing industry, we talk about conversion rate. And I would much rather have 1,000 or a smaller number that are highly engaged and responsive than some of these bigger channels where you see millions of subs, but the following isn't very high quality. So if we keep going forward, the numbers will go up and hopefully people stay engaged. We keep the same good quality of viewer. That's the thing, is people who watch YouTube videos, the average YouTube watcher, unfortunately, is rarely a high quality viewer to have in any sense of the word. But for some reason, people who consume my stuff, people who listen to the podcast, which is doing quite well, people over at the book club, are cream of the crop. So let's read some of these amazing comments, and I want to thank you very much for watching and being subscribed and supporting the channel. I'm just going to cherry pick a few. This comment is from Jack on the How to Read Great Imaginative Literature video. And Jack says, I remember having no money in my bank on the way home from a job I hated, but was reading Crime and Punishment on my journey. The story of Raskolnikov made me not worry about financials. And from then, I've always said I would be happy as long as I have a good book along the journey of life. Yeah, that's good. This is the sort of reading that I really like, and the older I get, the more I see this as a top value in great literature, is the sort of companionship, the intimacy. We can't know enough people in our lives physically. Even people who can know a lot of people, even people who talk at scale, teachers for example, we can't know enough people, but if we go to the great books and we befriend writers like Tolstoy, we get to know them intimately. There's something really comforting about that, and sometimes in your bleakest moments, sure, you don't want to read, you don't want to much do anything, but sometimes it can be a real comfort and it can be a salvation. It's kind of like reminding you that you're not quite alone. Whatever you're going through, somebody else has gone through some modification, some modulation of it before, or worse, and it kind of helps you. So, great comment. And on the same video, Beatrice said that she hears about hearing my reading approach, mainly because it validates what I have been doing when I read books. She talks about the last book she read by Joyce Carol Oates. She's a good writer. I took her masterclass. And it mentioned various classical music and jazz tracks. And now I have a whole newfound interest and appreciation just by looking them up and making that association with written word music. Yeah, this is something that I do. I did this recently when I was reading some Murakami. If you know Murakami, he touches upon a lot of classical music and jazz in his books. Funnily enough, he's talking with a composer, Ozawa, I think his name is, and they put their conversations in a book, and they just basically talk about their favourite classical music, their favourite pieces of jazz, and the really cool thing about that book is reading it and hunting out the tracks and listening to them whilst you're hearing two people that you respect and admire talk about them. But we can do that with books too, like in the book club, when Levin is reading Plato's Symposium, we went and read Plato's Symposium. That's a great way to sort of expand outwards and become a bit more well-read. Beatrice goes on to say, I also write notes and spontaneous thoughts down. As Levin says, a correct thought cannot fail to bear fruit. Additionally, since I have a modest tarot collection, I draw cards for characters in novels, match cards to concepts learned, etc. It's so much fun. Yeah, tarot is a lot of fun. Some people kind of scorn it a little bit when I talk about tarot. The way I see tarot, I read it in and I'm definitely not an expert, not even close, But my approach to tarot, or rather my approach to reading, is quite tarot-like. I see them kind of as mirrors. And isn't it interesting when we analyse the language that we use? A mirror. I always talk about books being a mirror, but that reveals so much about how I see the world. I'm very visual. That comes as no surprise. But you could equally talk about books as echoes. Now, if you were to say a book is an echo of the soul, an echo of you, then that would tell you immediately that the person you're talking to is quite auditory. I just think that's interesting. But amazing comments. Yeah, the way we read tarot, we can read books the same way, and it's very fulfilling. And we're looking at some comments on a video about the 7 poems that haunt me the most. This one's from Ryan Freeman, and he's talking about synchronicity. I find a lot of people who come to my videos notice a bit of synchronicity. Basically, there's this concept of when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And this is so true. This is true for, you know, proverbs and lived experience. We hear all these sort of words of wisdom that have gone into common parlance, like proverbs, cliches, but we don't take notice of them until we've lived it. So that's the same with these great books, is very often we just, if we don't understand them, if we don't understand Tolstoy, Shakespeare, Austen, it's because we haven't lived enough. But synchronicity is a real thing, and Ryan says 3 nights ago, I began watching Harold Bloom videos on YouTube in search of illuminating insights on the works of William Blake. I knew nothing of Bloom, except that he loved Emerson, which for me is good enough to trust a man, and as I listened to his interviews, I quickly forgot about my initial purpose and became enraptured by his noble battle against the school of resentment, as well as his other ideas and overall personality. Such an interesting man. Last night I heard him introduce Shakespeare's Sonnet 121 in a lecture, and was so struck by its beauty and meaning that I hastily took down my complete works and read it by candlelight. That's amazing. This morning in the sober light of dawn, I read it again and decided to see what others thought of it on YouTube. That's when I found this video, and needless to say, I was delighted to hear that you're carrying on Bloom's torch. Yeah, in that video I think I mentioned Sonnet 121. There's one of my favourites. "'Tis better to be vile than vile, esteemed, when not to be receives reproach of being." Yeah, as for Harold Bloom, I think in that video I was talking about how I'm bearing his literary torch a little bit. Something really spooky happened to me. I mean, spooky, it's how I interpret things. So I cracked open the complete works of Emily Dickinson, flicked it to a random page, and I alighted upon this one poem which no one talks about. It's not one of her most famous ones. It's a poem called "Had This One Day Not Been." And I read it, in the dead of night, and then months later, I didn't really know much about Bloom until that time. I'd come across his critical commentaries in university, but I didn't know who he was. And then months later, my friend introduced me to Bloom in his work, and I kind of had some initial resistance, but then I kind of completely loved everything he was talking about. Ryan mentions the school of resentment. The school of resentment, that's basically the current academia is dominated by neo-feminists, Marxists, people who want to sort of tear the writers down. They'll sort of tear Shakespeare down and damn him in readerly court. So they'll read his works through the colonialism lens or through some other lens that doesn't seek to interpret him in a positive light. And very often even today, it was bad in Bloom's time, and he was talking in the 90s, but today it's really bad, where there is a bit of it's open hunting season, to use a Dave Chappelle phrase, on straight white men, which is, you know, unfortunate because straight white men, although one might contest as to many of their straightness, but straight white men have written a lot of great things. I say I might contest their straightness because, to be honest, if you're in theatre, poetry, literary studies at all, you'll know if you've been there, if you've gone into the literary classes, if you've read anything by, just name like a handful of your favourite writers, and I would tell you that their sexuality is probably not as straightforward as you would ostensibly think. But he took issue against this. He was a bit of a dinosaur in his own words, and they didn't like him because he took issue with the whole academic climate. But yes, anyway, he died, and I found out months later that he died at, I think, the exact moment, definitely the same day and around the same time, but I think he died at the same moment that I flicked open this poem and sort of became enraptured with Emily Dickinson, one of his favourite poets. He held her up as the American sublime, along with Walt Whitman. And what I'm doing with, the different lectures in the book club and stuff, I see that as being very much part of a tradition that Bloom was part of. He was the last bastion of that, and it would die if someone didn't carry it on. He carried on the torch, and he traces, if you read him, he traces his literary forebears all the way back to Dr. Samuel Johnson, and he goes through William Hazlitt, and he talks about his contemporaries. But then when he died, there's no one talking today. You can obviously throw out your favourite clinical psychologist or whoever you like to listen to today, but I'm talking actual ostensible literary studies, like of the old school literary studies, aesthetic appreciation. There's no one really doing that. So that was a bit spooky, and thank you for your comment, Ryan. Let's read another one. Okay, this is a comment by Rut, who... Yeah, a lot of these comments I've actually spoken to you personally, or kind of one-on-one, either in messages or otherwise, so I feel like I know you guys quite well. But this is Rut talking on the video called 8 Writers and Books I Find Extremely Difficult to Read. He says, I recently read Cervantes, the ingenious gentleman, Don Quixote de la Mancha, and I find it very difficult to follow and to understand. I really appreciate your podcasts and generally what you do. Thank you a lot. I wish I had met you earlier, but I guess it's better late than never. Yeah, I'll just quickly say before we get on to Don Quixote, people talk about meeting me. I get a lot of emails, really nice emails from people. And if you do want to email me, the email is ben@benjaminmcavoy.com. People say that I'm like a friend. They'll listen to the podcasts and they'll go for a walk or they'll go for a run. And I'm talking in their ear and people seem to know me, so it's kind of a funny experience when people talk to you and they just know you really well and you're kind of talking to them for the first time, but everyone's super nice, so it's a nice experience. Talking about Don Quixote, okay, so what translation you choose is really, really important with Cervantes. You can be a bit flippant with other books. For example, when we get into the Russians, okay, everybody scorns Constance Garnett, but she's not that bad. If you end up reading Constance Garnett instead of Pevere and Volokonsky, it's not the end of the world. Pevere and Volokonsky are just a bit better at rendering the effect that Tolstoy would have given in Russian, but in English. Cervantes, there are probably 10 main translations. Of course, there's more than that, and they all differ so wildly. The translation I recommend, and we're going to use this translation, I would recommend as part of our big summer read in the Hardcore Literature Book Club. Cervantes is perfect for reading across summer. It's the John Hollander translation. Really, really funny, renders the humour perfectly. But my first encounter with Don Quixote was, unfortunately, if you can see here, I love the Everymans, but the translation Everyman chose, I could not abide by. This is by P.A. Motto. Unreadable. Absolutely unreadable. We'll probably hold up the different translations of Don Quixote together in a future video, so you'll see what I mean. But be careful, Don Quixote. There's a wild difference between translations. Okay, this is a comment from a video called How to Get into Poetry as a Beginner. What's your opinion on Edgar Allan Poe's poems? Are they good for a beginner? Okay, so I basically went back and said that I like the gothic atmosphere of The Raven. I like gothic stuff. Edgar Allan Poe is good for a beginner. I don't think he's particularly difficult. In fact, his diction, how repetitive he is quite good for a beginner. It's quite good for somebody who might not speak English as a first language. To reference Harold Bloom, who we talked about in a couple of comments back, Edgar Allan Poe benefits from translation, even into English. Yeah, I don't really like Poe. I think The Raven's all right, but his other poems, Annabel Lee, etc., they're just not very good, unfortunately. And the same is true for his short stories, in my opinion. I know a lot of people like him. I know a lot of schools study him, and he's all right. He's interesting to study. The Fall of the House of Usher, his early detective stuff, The Black Cat, Pit and the Pendulum, The Imp of the Perverse, The Telltale Heart, of course. Now that I say them, they're all quite famous, quite recognisable. They're all right. Maybe, what I would recommend when it comes to poetry is get yourself a good anthology, and then if Poe's in there, have a little look, read him aloud, maybe listen to some recordings. I think Christopher Lee did some good recordings of Poe. and make up your own mind. But personally, I wouldn't spend much time reading him myself. Okay, I've not really got anything to say overtly to this comment, but I like it. Cody says, bruh, this is the most underrated channel on YouTube. Not only is the quality of the content outstanding, but so is the video quality, which many book reading channels lack. Hope to see this channel grow exponentially in the next year. I'm finishing up my own read of Count of Monte Cristo currently, and then reading The Idiot with another book club, but I'll certainly subscribe after and take advantage of the Anna Karenina materials. Cheers. Thank you, Cody. Thanks, bruh. I hope it will grow exponentially as well, and the fact is it wasn't too long ago, a few months, when I had basically no subscribers, so to hit 1k is pretty nice. We've got a good group inside the book club, good enough for me to persevere and keep going with it. The podcast's doing really well. We keep tripling the listener amount each month, and it's going up in the ranks all over the world, which is awesome. I get emails every day, like quite a few. It's really hard to keep up with, so if I haven't responded to you immediately, then it's probably because I haven't seen it yet. Sometimes I have to batch them. I get in a bit of a backlog. I'm so happy people are liking it. I would agree. There's this what do you call it, BookTube? Yeah, I don't have a great opinion of the majority of what we might call BookTube, because either the books people are talking about are, in my opinion, not worth talking about. And it's not because I scorn YA. YA is okay, there's some good stuff, and it's got its value, it's got its purpose. Can be a bit of fun escapism. But not only that, but the people who review those books usually don't go into much depth. Again, I'm not calling out anyone specific because I actually don't know anyone. I don't know any names or anything. But from what I've seen, people usually stand there and they hold the book. Should I do an impression? They'll hold the book. Okay, they wouldn't hold this book, St. Augustine's Confessions. They'd hold some other, I don't know, Sarah J. Maas or something like that. Again, I'm not dumping it. I hope I'm not dumping on anyone's favourite writer. But they'll hold the book like that. They'll talk about the cover, and then they'll be like, cut, 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 cut. Every single tiny little gap, every little pause is a cut and a cut and a cut. I don't know whether they do it for flow or if they do it because they actually cannot, because they spend too long thinking between words and sentences and stuff. But it's a bit jarring, isn't it? And then you've got the other side of BookTube, where they do talk about classics, and as Cody mentioned, the quality isn't great. I don't think the quality is particularly amazing on mine, but I do make it as a sort of personal goal or mission to each month make it a little bit better. So in the back end of the book club, I'm always playing around with different formats, different forms, making it look different. I've got plans to make some full documentary style things. I've got some locations shot. I'm looking into like clippable mics. So to be honest, at the moment, the fact that I'm just sitting here in front of my bookshelf and people seem to be interested is miraculous to me. So thank you all very much. So one of my favourite videos was which country has the best literature in the world, and I asked people to drop their favourite country for literature in the comments. So I'm just going to go through because we've got a nice selection. Michael says that he likes German literature. He's talking about Hesse and Man. He's currently reading a bit of Tolstoy. Has yet to read any French literature at all. Yeah, Hesse, we're going to read his Siddhartha. Where is it? In the book club, because we're reading some big ones. We're reading Proust, which is French literature. Massive, so we need to break it up with some of the smaller texts, and I think that's very manageable and it's a nice change of pace. All the books in the book club have kind of been picked so that they offer a nice gear shift after you read each one. I don't know if you would start with Proust for French literature. I definitely think he's one of my favourites, and I think À la recherche de temps perdu is one of my favourite. I don't even know if you'd call it a novel, roman, Bildungsroman. It's a big epic thing, but it's good if you can persevere through the first 200-300 pages of the first novel, which actually on a reread you'll massively enjoy, but then it gets thrilling. Sarah says she likes French, Proust, Flaubert, Hugo, Stendhal, Apollinaire, Camus. Yeah, man, Hugo's awesome. We're going to read Les Misérables together at some point. We've got another German fan, Man, Kafka, Hesse, Rilke. Rilke's amazing. His Letters to a Young Poet, I did a podcast on that. That book really exemplified the principle of when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I was in a Viennese bookstore. I was living in Vienna at the time, and it just kind of leapt out at me. I don't know why. It wasn't a particularly alluring cover or anything. I just kind of zeroed in on it automatically, and it was great. Yeah, Lucius said that he disagrees on something that I said. He says liking a certain literature is not necessarily about liking a country of its origin. For example, I always enjoyed American 20th century sci-fi literature, but I genuinely dislike American society and their perception of the world in general. At the time, they just happened to be good at the genre. For some reason that I like. Russian authors were good at sci-fi too, but they were often either too optimistic or too serious and pretentious, for my taste at least. Yeah, that's interesting. I love American literature, especially the modernist stuff. I had a teacher who said that American literature was an oxymoron, and I thoroughly disagree. We can go down my bookshelf at some point. You'll see I've got loads of great works. Blood Meridian, Cormac McCarthy. What else we got? We got Toni Morrison over here. I'm not going to dislodge her because a load of books will fall out, but Song of Solomon, Faulkner, Flannery O'Connor, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. American literature is wonderful. I tried living in America, and again, I don't think this is particularly going to offend anybody because, I mean, my best friends are American. Funnily enough, some of the people that I look up to the most are American. Some of my heroes, the writers who I follow and listen to endlessly and read endlessly, they're all American. I couldn't live there. I found the culture, I found it to be a real culture shock. Now, I don't know if this was state dependent. I'm assuming it must be. Again, not dumping on anybody. I tried to live in Arizona. It was alright. It was hot, which was good. I'm not sure if I could... I felt like it was, and I don't know if this is the same everywhere, so maybe it's unfair, but I felt like people kind of weren't listening when I was speaking. Although the accent might have been a problem, because a lot of people would just go, oh, I'm just listening to your accent. They wouldn't actually listen to what I was saying. For culture shock, what's interesting, I spent my 20s living in Japan. I felt less culture shock in Japan, which is like another world for a Westerner, than I did in America. America was the most severe form of culture shock I've ever experienced, and I've visited probably 31, 32 countries. I've lived in probably, I don't know, 6 or 8 long term. Yeah, but hey, I love American literature. But yeah, pertinent comment. Okay, another great comment. This is from James on a video called How to Rekindle Your Love of Reading. He says, I went into a big reading slump from 2018 to 2020. Last November I started reading Bleak House at a rather slow pace compared to how I used to read. I found this means I'm really living with the characters in the story. I find myself considering the plot and the characters' decisions and motives whilst I'm cleaning. On top of this, I'm reading poetry by Ted Hughes and a Shakespeare play at the weekend. This has really re-engaged me. I'm looking forward to starting my undergraduate journey at either one of Bristol or Durham this October. Oh, great. Awesome. Thank you, James. Reading slumps. Right. Yeah. Actually, I had a bit of a reading slump in 2018. I think I said this in the video, but very often a reading slump is either indicative of, well, either or both, indicative of you not reading the right books, and the right books are books that do it for you, or challenge you, sweep you up a little bit, or it's just indicative of like larger things at play in your life, which is fair enough. We all go through ups and downs, but that's great that Bleak House and Dickens busted you out of a reading slump. Dickens is quite reliable in that regard. If you're going through a bit of a slump with your reading, you can just pick up some Dickens. Incidentally, talking about Dickens, I want to show you a couple of my Dickens collections. Usually when I try and get the Everyman books, but I'm also building out this. In the UK, a long time ago, we had something called the Dickens Collection, and it was a magazine, and every month you'd get a little magazine and you'd go through the entirety of the Dickens Collection. You start with Pickwick Papers, then Oliver Twist, and you go through them, and each magazine would tell you a little something different about Dickens' time, and you get these, and they're kind of, I think they're the original printing, and they've got the original sketches by Boz, and they're just brilliant. They're, I think the publisher's called Fabry. I got them all, and I still have some of them, but then I think I lost some, so I've been rebuilding them, and now I have tons of duplicates, but they're quite easy to obtain. You have to go to eBay and stuff like that to get hold of them, but these are top edition of Dickens. Very, very fun to hold in your hands. Feels like you're reading a book. add Fireside for extra sort of authentic Dickens experience. And we got a comment from Sharon. Hi Ben, this is an excellent video highlighting what I've come to see as competitive reading. Yeah, competitive reading, man. Cracking that TBR list, setting unachievable goals that would mean for me probably having to read in my sleep. I love the idea of savouring a book, making it a part of you, allowing it to influence you, having a relationship with it, the characters, and vicariously with the author. I also love, especially with the classics, entering a part of history that is dead to us now, but for that brief moment comes alive through the text. A window into a place or time long gone. So exciting. Hubby and I have started Anna. Oh my, we're loving it. Discussion well underway. Yep. Reading an amazing book should be like going on the journey of a lifetime. Take photos, keep a journal, record every moment, and then choose a new destination and do it all again. I love that. I keep journals as well. I'll probably have to break them down at some point, show them off a little bit. But the same way where you keep it like a travel journal and you paste in your photos and write a little impression. I do the same for my books. It's just part of the fun, really. Yeah, and at the moment in the book club, we're visiting St. Petersburg, 1866, Dostoevsky's St. Petersburg, by virtue of this horrific novel about a dude that cleaves two ladies' heads in half with an axe. Great read. Yeah, but this competitive reading, this is kind of what I'm so against, which is a bit funny, because it sounds hypocritical, because I talk about how I read like 5+ books at the same time. Well, they're not 5+ new stories that I've never encountered before. It's usually one main story, and then it's other rereads, or it's poetry, or short stories, or it's non-fiction or philosophy, so it's not that bad. And I personally do really slow down. Anna Karenina took me 6 months. So the fact that most people in the book club have cracked Anna Karenina in, I think, 8 weeks-ish, is phenomenal. I would highly recommend you reread it, because the reread is the most important thing. Okay, from that same video we've got George saying thank you for such an interesting discussion, love your channel and the direction you're taking it. He goes on to talk about War and Peace, Dostoevsky, and this is the part that I really like. I have now slowed down my reading pace. As you said, reading the book chapter by chapter, line by line, absorbing and comprehending these lively portraits. Also, putting the book down, even mid-chapter, and thinking over it. I was definitely inspired by one of your videos where you said that you let the lines wash over you. That is my new approach, and it has transformed reading for me. I ask myself, why should we live in a world where language is beautiful? Taking each line as a gift and letting my heart catch up to my mind. This is always better than taking utility from the book. Yeah, man, that's really nice. Taking each line as a gift. That's why you got to be careful which books you pick, because if you pick the right book and you bring yourself fully to it, you won't be disappointed. You can't pick some of this frivolous fiction. Of course, sometimes frivolous fiction. I would class, what's a good one? Ian Fleming, James Bond. That's a bit of fun. I've been working my way through the Bond novels recently. Just a bit of fun. You wouldn't do that with Bond. It's just, but you would probably do that with Tolstoy, you do that with Shakespeare, you do that with Austen. Yeah, awesome comment. Okay, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you all for your comments, whether I read them out or not. I appreciate all of them. I try my best to get around to responding to everything. Thank you so much for supporting the show and helping us hit 1K. That's awesome. What's the next milestone? I'm thinking 5K, 10K? Might be a little while before we get there, but we'll see. Anyway, if you want another video similar to this, or you want a Q&A video, then drop a question in the comments below, and please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. You might also want to check out the Hardcore Literature Book Club. I have a Patreon specific Q&A coming up. This week I'm going to sit down with a coffee and answer all the bookish questions put to me in the book club. That's at patreon.com/hardcore literature. Thank you very much for watching, and happy reading.